Hey.
Hey. Mad Rush.
Good to see you.
Yep, good to see you too. Well, quote unquote see.
Yeah, good to hear you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So crazy morning for you too, or is that just me?
Kind of just you. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I'm just glad it wasn't like anything terrible happened.
No, just helping fill in for my dad.
Okay. Well,
he's AFK.
So actually, I have a story before we start today's show.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
So this happened over the past, I think, 2 days or so. There was this girl who is in my class, and I use the term girl loosely because she thinks she's a guy, and that whole debacle. And as you know, my sister is a very staunch supporter of me, and she also had a class with her, and the girl went up to her and said, "I don't like your brother's Trump hat." And first of all, she hadn't seen my LGBT Liberty Guns Bible Trump shirt yet, so she was in. She would get a very good surprise the next day. And she basically went off on my sister that, hey, I don't like it. From my understanding, obviously I wasn't there, but from what I could tell, she was relatively respectful, and I think my sister did about the same. I'm sure. I know that the situation got a little heated, but thankfully they weren't like cussing each other out or anything. And then the next day, I went to class and I was wearing my shirt and my hat. And I went up to her and I said, "Okay, let's talk about this." And admittedly, I was expecting a high-pitched, shrieky reaction, because that's kind of what you expect from a trans person who is hating on,
Trump.
hating on Trump or whatever. That's kind of what you get from all those videos. Thankfully, though, I went up to her and, believe it or not, we had a very nice, reasonable discussion where we told each other our point of views, and we talked about Trump. We talked about a little bit about immigration policy, about the transgenders in the military. And at the end of it, like I do with every discussion that I have that is respectful, I thanked her for being respectful and for not raising the level of the argument to a heated debate or anything. So that was a pleasant surprise to have that happen.
Yeah, you didn't get a screamer.
Yeah, which I was happy about. And yeah, we talked all the way up until the start of class, and then the teacher was like, "Can you sit down? Thanks." And we were like, "Yeah, okay."
Sounds like a pretty good conversation, though.
Yeah, and I found out this. Tell me if you've ever heard of someone like this. She said that she hated Trump, but she also hated Obama and hates Biden.
I haven't heard of that. Hating everybody. So I'm guessing she is libertarian, maybe?
I would not say that. Her views are definitely farther to the left, but I was just like, wow, okay. I've heard of people hating politicians as a class, but never like I hated every single last president.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
That's definitely something anybody, especially not in our age, really talks a lot about the third party.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and actually that kind of ties perfectly into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're leaning one way or the other. All right, guys. Well, I'll go ahead and start us off for real this morning. This is the Wake Up America podcast, day number 7. Today we're talking about conservatives versus liberals. and pretty much everything there is on both sides, making comparisons, similarities, differences on both sides. I mean, they have. I don't really think they have similarities in beliefs, but they have similarities in structure.
Yeah, it almost like an alternative structure, kind of mirrored.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have radicals on both sides, but obviously, I mean, the beliefs are completely different, and even the more mild people beliefs are completely different. So, same structure, different, different goals, different, pretty much different everything. And me and Spencer, we are obviously conservatives, pretty strong conservatives, but not radicals. And there's a big difference. For anyone who accuses us of ever being a radical, um, radical right or radical conservative or whatever. Um, Radicals normally take a more aggressive stance on things. Such as like the QAnon people, um, or even some of those people that were in the events on January 6th in the Capitol. Um, they're and obviously just for the Capitol riot makes a good comparison to that. They represent a very 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 small portion of the total amount of people who consider themselves to be conservative. Very, very small amount are radical, but like everybody else, the radicals, the ones who are talked about the most, and we're judged by the worst of us. So, I mean, and I do think that there are more radicals on the liberal side than there are on the conservative side. Um, just because conservatives. Go ahead, Spencer.
I just said I agreed with you.
Yeah. There's more radicals on the left than there is on the right. But while there are radicals on both sides, and everyone really gets judged on whatever side they are based on the actions of the radical left. And like I said, there's more on one side than the other. Um, and I'm just going to go ahead and go right to the point, and we can kind of go from here. Um, I believe the main difference between the radical, but no, no, sorry, not between radical, between any of the right and any of the left is a respect and is a value for what we have and appreciation versus wanting change or wanting something more, and then also a matter of respect. I believe that
Hmm.
conservatives generally have more respect, for instance, for like the Constitution. We love the Constitution. We love the United States. We love this great country that we live in. Whereas on the left, there's less respect for it. The communist they have beliefs like a lot of the individuals and who identify with BLM, where they believe that the Constitution or America as a whole just represents a validation of slavery, or was just a way to put power into the hands of white individuals in our government. Back when at the creation of the country, and I think that's where that's kind of like the founding difference is going back to the biggest thing that we fight over, which is the Constitution. The right believes the Constitution to be the word of law and the guide of our morals, and the left believes in various other things. Whether it's a person who is on the left and they have extreme views and they might be LGBTQ. You have dumb stuff like the cancel culture, and the dumb pronouns stuff that everybody wants you to put in your bio. Like on the right, there's much more of a value. And if you ask me, if anyone has any other opinions, please feel free to share them. I believe there more is a value for individuals, and the basic rights that they have, but there's not an overvaluation for any group. Like we don't believe the conservatives don't believe that white people have any more rights than black people do. They don't believe that one is oppressed more than the other. It's just a matter of respecting the human rights of every individual, no matter the race, class, gender, whatever it is. And I think the difference is on the left that they look for reasons to see difference. Like you have things where, um, some believe that there is a, 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 a wage gap for men versus women. And I've held several different jobs, and I've actually known many of the women who were um, making better pay than I had, even though they had started at the same time as me. They were just promoted faster, but they all made the same pay as me if they were the same thing. So maybe in certain instances, in weird companies that are this or that, there might be a wage gap, but I would say for the vast majority of the United States population, that's just an example of looking for a problem where there isn't any.
Yeah, and I'll add some more things that I think about the difference between the right and the left. You brought up a lot of good points, and I think two other good points. Kind of touching on one of the things you talked about was I think that the right looks it looks at the human race as a bunch of individuals. I think the conservative in general looks and sees an individual rather than a group. It seems to me that people on the left will look at a group and will judge someone based on the group, or will give them certain benefits or detriments based on being in that group. For example, affirmative action for, I don't know, blacks, where they say that, well, we see that your skin is a different color, therefore we think you're oppressed, and so we're going to give you this affirmative action. And the right looks and it says, okay, I see that you are a human being, and I see that you made these sets of choices which led you to a good career or led you to be on a good path, and because you made those good choices, I'm going to give you, I don't know, a scholarship for school or various other stuff like that. So to me, the left really focuses on the groups, whereas the right really focuses on the individuals. And another thing that I notice between the right and the left, and conservatives and liberals in general, is that, as the name implies, conservatives want to conserve. They want to conserve the traditions that we have. They want to conserve things, but they don't want nothing to change. If half the country, or a majority of the country back much farther into our country's history, if half the country had said, no, we don't want electricity to come, or no, we don't want, we don't want this advancement or that advancement, then we would be behind every other country in the world. But I think what conservatives do is they welcome progress and change as long as it is a moral good, or as long as that change is something that will benefit society and not deteriorate rights. Whereas, from the way I see it, liberals see that's where the term progressive comes from. Is progressives, liberals generally want progress, period. They don't care what type of progress it is, as long as society is changing and making progress, whether that's in direction A or direction B, then they're happy because things are not staying the same. And a
Yeah.
lot of the time, that turns into bad things, such as the expansion of the definition of marriage to include basically anything. I think there was a woman who married her dog, and there was a woman who married like a pillow or something. There's some crazy stuff that has been allowed to fit into our traditions because the country has allowed those traditions to be expanded, to include things that were not originally part of them, nor were they ever intended to be part of them. So I think that difference is one of the biggest ones between the right and the left, is just that the right wants to move forward at a more careful pace and making sure that we are keeping the same principles behind our action, whereas the left wants to have progress no matter what that progress is or where it's going.
Yeah, and I mean there are things of progress. For instance, like the civil rights movement, that was an amazing thing. Our history is something that we are absolutely all for. Civil rights, absolutely. And that was an issue that was on both party lines. Or I shouldn't say party lines. As in Republican versus Democrat, because that was partisan. But the conservatives, and there were liberals who both supported ending of segregation, and there was mass movements that were supported by both sides. And then you have things like the LGBTQ movement, which that is much more so to the left, to the liberals. I believe that's because there's a difference in a matter of religion between liberal and conservative. I think most conservatives, or at least most Christians, are conservative. And so, there's a large value of keeping with religious beliefs and stuff like that that's ingrained into the conservative values. Same for me here. Me and Spencer, we're both Christians. So the LGBTQ movement was something that was more unique to the liberal side, to the left. And I can say that I'm not pro LGBTQ, but I'm not anti either. I'm just neutral. I'm not gonna always hang out with a gay person just because I don't want to say I don't like gay people, because people are gonna twist that. I'm just not. Yeah, people are gonna be like, "Oh, you're a hater."
The ideology that often goes along with it is sometimes hard to handle, because a lot of those people, I know several gay people, and many of them are very nice, but some of them are the type where it's just constantly talking about politics and constantly espousing their views when I don't care. We're having a discussion about, food, and all of a sudden you bring in that, oh, by the way, I'm gay.
Yeah. That's just one thing. And there are things with the LGBTQ rights that help people. And I'm not gonna, those are good things that help those people to attain rights, such as the right to be able to marry, insurance, stuff like that. But nowadays, people say the LGBTQ movement, but the LGBTQ movement has just boiled down to, you're not allowed to say that you don't like gay people. You're not allowed to say you don't like transgender people. You have to support them or you're a hater, and you got to put pronouns in your bio. Put your pronouns in your bio. You hear that all the time. Don't call me by my wrong. Those aren't my pronouns. Don't say that. Stuff like that. It's just it's boiled down to another difference between the conservative and liberal, is where we aren't going to shove our beliefs down everyone else's throat. We're going to talk about them, yeah, absolutely, but you'll get much more open discussion from individuals who are conservative, such as Steven Crowder you see him on YouTube, and he's done his Change My Mind series, which is completely open format. Everyone can talk openly. You can have whatever opinion you want, and you can attempt to change his mind. He'll attempt to change yours, but it's meant to be a civil conversation. Same as how me and Spencer are doing here on this show. We really enjoy having civil conversation between people. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't really matter to us. Leave comments and let's just talk. And that's the difference that you see between, I would say, majority of the left, even though not everybody falls in the category. When I say I have to say majority, or I can't just say the left, because everyone will be like, oh, well, there's people who are good too. And I'm like, yes, there are people who are good, but the majority believe more in, like Spencer said, constantly talking about, like you having a conversation about what's your favorite pizza, and they're going to be like, oh, by the way, I'm gay. And you're going to be like, okay, that doesn't mean anything. And now we're just weird.
Yeah. And kind of going on that topic real quick, the way that conservatives like us kind of treat that issue is that if someone is gay and we're talking to them, if they say, I'm, by the way, I'm gay, we'll go, okay, good for you. If that's what makes you happy, if that's what you think you need to have fulfillment in your life or whatever, then that's fine. And conservatives generally, we will have our principles, right? The traditional view of marriage is between one man and one woman. And we will say, I don't I don't support you, or I don't support what you're doing, right? That would be the same thing as if someone's an alcoholic. I don't support you being an alcoholic, but you can say I support you as a human being and as having that inherent worth as being a human being, and having that worth and those rights from God. And so I can treat you respectfully and as a human being while still disagreeing with something that you may be doing. Whereas I think on the left, a lot of the time they say, "Well, you don't agree with what I'm doing. That must mean that you hate me, or that you hate me rather than hating or disliking what I'm doing." A good example is that I have a cousin who is gay and married to another woman, and I don't agree with that, but I still love her and I still support her as a human being, even though I don't support the fact that she married another woman.
Yeah, and there's, I would say that's something that was more so unique to the left, sorry, to the right, to the left than to the left, because we have especially on the we have especially with a strong belief of believing in the Constitution. With, I mean, there's different conservative groups that live in different countries throughout the world, but American conservatives um, have strong beliefs in the Constitution and the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. You're allowed to believe you want to believe, freedom and the liberties to pursuit of life and pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and happiness. And those are things that pertain more so to the values of the conservative groups, than they're due to liberals. And because of that inherent value, there's more of an inherent individual respect, whereas we've already covered, and Spencer perfectly, the left looks at things as groups. So if they see one small act representing a group, like when you had the Capitol Hill protests, you saw a very, 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 very small group of people compared to everyone that was there protesting peacefully. A small group was violent, and that reflected on the whole group that was right outside and being peaceful. And they criminalized the entire group, the whole protest, even though everyone was being very lawful, and they were really good. I mean, the officers weren't scared of them outside. The National Guard, when they showed up, they weren't scared of them either. There was a unspoken amount of respect that was present, that led to people were like, oh, okay, well, now this has happened, we need to go. So they just respected the officers, they respected our country, and they respected the Constitution. And then after they had finished protesting peacefully, they walked away, and everyone looked at this and said, hey, there was this group of people that were doing these things, and so they're bad. All of them are bad. 75 million Americans are evil. Everyone who supports Trump is evil, because this group happened. Whereas on the right, you have things like the BLM riots, and we were like, BLM as an organization is bad, but we do believe in Black Lives Matter. And then they're also like, we also love people of all different races and colors, and we're not going to sit here and say that everyone who supports BLM is an evil person, just that those who were in the riots and that were burning things down, those are bad people. There's a difference there. Whereas
Right.
if the shoes were on the other foot, so to say, or if the positions were switched, then it would be more so like the left saying, I'm sorry, BLM, they were rioting, so every single person who supports BLM across the whole country, or identifies or anything like that, or maybe even you can take a step further with things like racism and stuff like that. They would be like, oh, those people are just all bad. Everybody's bad. But the conservatives look at things more of an individual value, judging each person by their acts, not by the acts of a group that they support.
Right. And that's a really key thing to do as a human being. Is I can't judge Coulson because all right. I can generally look at Coulson and say, okay, he identifies as a conservative, so I can expect him to do these certain things, but I shouldn't judge him and hate him just because he's a conservative. I should instead judge him, get to know him, and interact with him as an individual. And as an individual, I can then use my judgment to say, okay, maybe I'm a liberal, he's a conservative, but he's a nice person and he may have different beliefs than me, but I'm going to respect him because he is being nice. For those that are listening, feel free to add clean comments and share the show.
Yeah, we do have our first comment of the day, so we can go ahead and listen to that real quick.
Hey, good morning, guys. I was just reading your title there. By chance, are you guys with God as well? Because your title is related to what God is doing today, and just wanted to make sure you guys were with God and everything else. Anyway, my name is Markless, and I don't matter, for the one in me is greater than he who lives in this world.
So we are Christian, and that's
Yeah.
a lot of where our values come from, is being Christian and being raised Christian and conservative.
Yeah, and when some people will say, "Oh, you were raised Christian, so you don't know any better," and me and Spencer, we really make sure that we, study everything and we are aware of everybody's different opinions. So we both look at, liberal, meaning media and news, but then we also listen to conservative news at the same time, obviously. And I think that's something that is also unique to conservatives. And I think that pertains more to the cancel culture thing, because conservatives are like, okay, well, I want to be educated, so I need to get all the information, or if I want to have an argument politically, I need to make sure I know what the other side is talking about. And when you have the liberal side of that, they're more like, anybody who doesn't agree with us, we're just going to cancel them, like you had with the Gina Serrano incident, or with the new attempt by the House Democrats to try and ban Newsmax and Fox News from reporting anymore. That's just another. That's actually a really staunch example of cancel culture and not being open to all different opinions. Another thing that's different between conservatives and liberals, and that I think that ties again back into a belief in the freedom of the press and freedom of the free speech. That's just something that you won't see a strong liberal organization doing. They are not going to be like, oh, well, you don't believe what we have to say, so we're just going to do whatever we can to make your life miserable. You will have instances where it's like, when Gina Serrano was fired from The Mandalorian, there was many conservatives who were like, what the heck just happened? I'm not going to pay Disney Plus now since they are doing something that I believe against. And that's different than cancel culture. Same thing for Netflix's action at the beginning of last year, where they tried to release the Cuties movie, which was just essentially disgusting. Yeah, I'm not going to get into detail about that. Anyone who wants to know about that, look it up in 5 seconds. You'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, bad stuff. And those were both instances where there were conservative outspeak, but people were like, hey, this is not okay. We don't believe with this stuff, so we're just not going to support it anymore. So it was like, hashtag cancel Disney Plus, or hashtag cancel Netflix. And those are different than cancel culture. Cancel culture is just, like canceling people just because of whatever, like canceling people as an individual. So when Gina Serrano, especially on social media, because it's actually illegal for social media to do things like this, but they do it anyway. When they canceled Gina Serrano, they also deleted her from Twitter. So she doesn't have a Twitter account. I'm sorry, not deleted from Twitter. They deleted her tweets, all the ones that were deemed controversial. They delete all those tweets off the website. You have, with President Trump, they didn't like President Trump and they don't want him getting reelected, so they're making it difficult they tried to impeach him, so that way he would be blocked from running for office. They've deleted his Twitter, so that way he cannot talking more and bringing attention to himself for another election. That's just another good example of cancel culture. You have the same thing happening all the time, where people will say it doesn't matter their beliefs, but this person disagrees with them, so they need to make sure this person never is heard again. That even if this doesn't happen on the conservatives versus the liberals, it doesn't happen.
And on top of that, what I was talking about earlier about hating Coulson because he's conservative, judging him by the group rather than him as an individual. I don't know if you know this, Coulson, but people are trying to start the hashtag like fire Henry Cavill, the man who played Superman. I think that's his most prominent, famous role, but he's done a bunch of other stuff too. They're trying to cancel him because how dare he associate with Gina Carano? For those that don't know, he dated Gina Carano just for, I think, a little while. And now they're trying to get rid of him too because he decided to associate with her. And the thing that amazes me about that is that they're having such a visceral reaction. They're saying, we want to cancel her, and now we're going to cancel everyone around her. But they're not even taking 2 seconds to realize that he stopped dating her. Okay? He obviously doesn't agree with her on everything. Otherwise, they would still be dating. It's just ridiculous how they try to cancel and try to push views they think someone has onto them, whether they have them or not.
Absolutely, that's a great example there, Spencer. Another good example of that, and that's less so cancel culture. It's more so judging a group as a whole or indiscriminate violence. The Capitol Hill protest versus BLM riots. We can go back to that again. It's a very, very easy comparison to make there. You had the BLM riots there were a good number that were peaceful, and but there was we aren't talking about the ones that are peaceful because we admit that those were peaceful protests, and so they aren't being hotly debated because everyone agrees that they were peaceful protests. The debate is over riots like in Kenosha and Portland and Seattle. With the autonomous, that was technically just an invasion of American soil. All these instances, and then there was just indiscriminate violence. Like in Kenosha, Wisconsin, you had the BLM riots that were just hordes of people that were supporting BLM, ran down the streets and burned down innocent businesses that had absolutely no. They might have flown a flag, but they weren't flying like Trump signs or anti-BLM signs outside. They weren't.
A lot of them had BLM signs saying "I support BLM."
Yeah. Many of them even had BLM signs, and some of the reasons they had them up was just so people wouldn't attack them, and they would just go down streets, and they would burn down buildings, and they would go through neighborhoods, and there were instances where they would launch those giant Black Widow fireworks. Yeah, those things you see on 4th of July that light up like everything.
Yep.
Yeah, those ones, they were taking those and they were walking down the street and they were launching Black Widow firework rounds into people's houses. They were going inside with matches and lighting on fire the curtains and stuff in the garages to get the house to burn down. And I mean, while people were sleeping in their beds, they're doing this. Like, not like they'd all abandoned the houses. No, there were still people in the houses hunkering down or asleep. And that would never happen with a conservative group that was angry. And the best example of that, a conservative group got angry, over like 1 million of them, and they marched on Capitol Hill, and almost all of them, I don't even want to say almost, because almost implies that there was at least a decent number of people who were violent, but no, like pretty much every single person in that protest was peaceful. Except for a very, very, very small group of people who went into the Capitol Hill and were violent. And this, tying back into what we said about a whole instead of a group, that one group of violent people reflected badly on not only that protest, but every single supporter of Trump. Every single one of them was then immediately demonized and they're being canceled and crap like that. just because we support Trump and there was this one group of people who gave a bad name. We don't, in conservatives, you don't have that happening. We have people who say that they are pro BLM, and we're like, okay, let's talk about this. Why do you feel like that? And if they were individuals who actually partook in the riots and were violent and burned people down and killed people, and beat them up just for the fun of it, that would be an instance where I'd be like, okay, I never want to talk to you again. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that no one else has to listen to you either, because obviously you don't have a sense of intelligence in your entire body.
I think a big difference, kind of getting back to the ideology part of this discussion between conservative and liberal, is that the ideology of the right says no group should or can do bad things, right? The right says it doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter what's happening. You can't just go out and do bad things because you're mad or because you think there's an injustice. Whereas the left, oftentimes, which was crystallized by the BLM Antifa riots, was they said, look, this one group is being victimized, or it's being downtrodden, and whether that's true or not, they took that and used it as a way to do that violence rather than doing it through the peaceful method that we have set up in our country to make our country civilized and to keep us civilized. Because if we can go out and riot and destroy businesses just because of something, it doesn't matter what it is. If I can go out and riot because former Vice President Joe Biden is now considered the president, then our country is basically lost at that point. If you have the ability to riot and you have the ability to do what you want, it doesn't matter as long as you think your cause is just. And that's another difference between the left and the right, I think, is that the right, part of their traditionalism is that they look at the system that we have and they say, okay, here's the good things about our system. Now let's work within it peacefully to change what we think needs to be changed. Whereas a lot of leftists say, well, I don't care what the real system is. I think this needs to be changed, and so I'm going to force myself to get it done, or I'm going to circumvent the system that we have in place.
Exactly, yeah. And tying back into what Spencer said right there in the beginning, I believe that there's a little bit of polarization going on in the conservative, and I don't want to say party, but the conservative, everyone who's conservative really, where they're becoming very, very fed up with the illegality and the violence that liberals are putting forth and the fraud, and we're becoming fed up with the cancel culture. And so I think that was one of the justifications that I can put behind the individuals who I'm not going to justify individuals who committed murder. I'm just trying to see their understanding, and then everybody else who did not commit murder in the Capitol Hill protest, I would justify their actions. Just because, and it's very simple. I don't want people saying, "Oh, you just like violence, or you just like to see people getting hurt." I don't want to hear anybody saying that. I don't want anybody commenting that or anything like that. Don't even do it. I'm saying that people, they did it for a reason, and the difference is that the conservatives that were violent had anger and real reasoning and justification behind their actions, with the exception of those who hurt or murdered other people. But then when you have on the liberal side with the BLM protests and anyone else who is violent, there was not a justification. There was a lot of being a bunch of sheeple where they would follow what a politician said, or they would follow what a friend said, or what social media said, and they just turned into these large mobs that swept over cities and committed these horrible acts that we saw all through summer last year. The burning of cities and businesses, And if you ask some of these people, you know, like, why are you angry? They'll just be like, racial justice. But they can't really explain to you what they mean. They cite instances like George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor being an absolute fault of her boyfriend, and George Floyd, he was a convict who was drunk. Now, while I'm not justifying the actions of the cops who they went too far, they were too extreme. I'm saying that, you know, there's a difference between the actions of they continue back onto these actions of the few that justify the actions of many. You know, even like they were up in anger about, what was that guy we talked about recently, Spencer? The one who charged the cop with a knife? Jacob Blake,
no,
right?
that was a different guy. I don't think we remembered the name of the guy who had the knife.
Yeah, I can't remember what his name was now. On a blank. That was another instance, and then when you actually study the topic and see what happened, you look at the police report and firsthand accounts, you see that what was happening was very much so not an issue of racial justice or discrimination. It was just a matter of one person committing a crime and another person protecting themselves. And that's a difference there. They look at things like, oh, that person had black skin and he was arrested or he was killed by a police officer, so all cops are bad and America is racist.
And you can oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Spencer.
You can take the situation like at the Capitol where the people there that were peacefully protesting, they were there because they wanted change. They thought that something had been done wrong. And if you watch, they were peacefully protesting. But as soon as it became a riot, as soon as they broke into the Capitol and went outside those constitutional bounds of peacefully protesting, people on both sides said, this is terrible, this should not be happening, or this should not have happened. As soon as those people went outside of what the Constitution allowed, the right said this is terrible. But if you look at the riots that happened over the summer, then the left just said, well, this is peaceful, and well, you know, maybe they should be doing this since since something bad has happened. And that difference is just so stark to see that people justified that, but as soon as a few people broke into the Capitol, a relative few, then the left was saying, oh, this is terrible, this is outside what the First Amendment guarantees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just the best example of it. You know, that's the difference. You know, where they have people. You know, you had a lot of politicians and big tech businesses like you know, the leaders and owners of Facebook, of Twitter, and crap like that. And they were like, you know, this is good thing. This is social change. This is justice to go ahead and burn down these people's businesses and kill individuals in their homes and mob people on the streets that have done nothing. This is change. This is justice, and we're just gonna, you know, we're gonna say that this is a peaceful protest and that it was totally okay. And you had people on the right who were like, no, it's not. The actions of a few don't justify the violence against the many. You know, it's like you know, that famous thing, the lies, what is it? Sacrifice a few to save the many. I guess that's a little different, but you know, that's a good analogy there. That saying that like conservatives are like these things happened, and one, it's sad they happened, but they were almost every instance, I can't think of any. They were the fault of the individuals who got hurt. Like George Floyd, the only reason he was hurt, it was his fault. Anyone who's going to get super angry at me, go ahead. You know, I can have a very clear, level-headed discussion about that. I spent a lot of time studying the topic.
And talking about that real quick, I think some of that came down to the fact that the police officer was not trained well, but the autopsy said that, listen, it doesn't matter what would have happened after this. If the guy had just left him standing, he ingested enough drugs to kill himself anyways. And
not to mention he was an ex-convict already.
Right. And the ideology that we've been talking about of conservatives versus liberals is you can go back to our last show where we kind of talked about this. The ideological differences between the two is really what pushes this type of action. If you are on the left says that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you think it's right. And as soon as you have that logic and as soon as you have that ideology where, well, okay, it doesn't matter what I do as long as I think it's right, then all of a sudden I can riot as long as I think it's justified, or I can do anything I want as long as I think it's justified. Whereas the right says, no, you can't do whatever you want and say it's fine. There are these sets of principles that we believe in and that we think you should follow. And you're allowed to go outside of those if you don't believe, but there is still this set of values. And those two things, you can just look, they naturally lead to what happened. The left that says you're able to do whatever you want led to riots where people did whatever they wanted. And you have the right who said, no, you have to follow these principles. And then, as soon as a similar action as the BLM riots, on a much smaller scale, by the way, happened, the right said, this is terrible and you are not following what we are espousing as our beliefs. So that ideological difference really pushes two different ways of viewing America and viewing what you can do with your actions.
Absolutely, that is perfect, Spencer. We don't. Yeah, you judge the actions of an individual based on their own individual actions and not the actions of a group, right? So, like, you can't say every German. I'm gonna make another World War II Holocaust reference here. You can't say every German in Germany was evil because that's not true. There was a lot of Germans who were just as oppressed as many of the people that the Nazis oppressed. Less so though than the Jews during the Holocaust. But much of the German population was greatly oppressed too. There was just a group of Nazis, and many of those Nazis also were just scared soldiers that were just doing what they were told, just like every other army in the world. And not every soldier in that army is an evil, horrible human being that everybody in the world should just hate as a person. There were individuals in the Nazi army who were just people who were fighting for their country, or at least thought they were fighting for their country. They were deceived by lies and by propaganda and led to believe that not the Nazi Party was the best thing that they could do for their country, and so they enlisted or they were drafted, things like that. And so going back to the Germans, you can't judge the horrible acts of the Nazi Party to reflect every single person in the German populace, because there were a lot of people in the German populace that weren't, obviously, like I said, not Nazis. That's just a good example. I don't judge every single person in the LGBTQ movement to be this, as me and Spencer affectionately call, a screamer, where when you don't agree with them, they just start screaming at you. They lose the intelligent conversation that me and Spencer work to preserve in this show. They just start yelling and shouting and losing their minds over even if it's just the smallest thing, like I don't want to put pronouns in my bio. They're like, oh, well, you're just a hater. You're transphobic. You hate everybody who's gay, and all these different things. And you're like, no, that's not true at all. I just don't want to put pronouns in my bio.
Right.
Or if I'm not gay, or I don't talk about supporting gay people, then that means I hate them. There's a difference there. There's an area where that subscribes to the whole First Amendment. I have the freedom of speech and I have the freedom to have my own opinions. Where I don't have to always say, if I don't agree with people who are gay, that doesn't mean I have to be gay or say I like gay people or I'm a hater. It's not how it is. But a majority of the Liberal Party subscribes to that kind of ideology and screams and yells until they're blue in the face, whether they're lying or not, or whether they have absolutely no information and they're just hopping on some bandwagon that they know nothing about. It happens all the time, and it's a stark contrast to the majority of the conservative party that don't do things like hop on any random bandwagon before finding out who's on the bandwagon and what they're working for, right? Like, you know, make the bandwagon analogy even more real. Let's say you're back in, like, you know, 1800s or whatever, 1700s. You know, you're going to be a pioneer. You're going to go across the country. You don't want to hop on some random person's wagon, you know, with the weirdest people in the world that are going to go, and they're actually going to be a pioneer. They're just going to go and stop. You want to find out what you're getting on first, and that's the difference between liberals and conservatives. They get on a bandwagon and they just say, oh, okay, this is where I'm at now, and I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do. Whereas conservatives are like, okay, I think this is what I like, and then once we figure out, and if we agree with whatever ideology, we do our research, we find out information, we don't sound like idiots when we try to have debates.
Yeah, and we have to go in just a few minutes, but I think we can take this audio recording and then respond to it. For those that are listening, feel free to add audio comments on our next show and follow us so that you'll be able to listen to that next show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, there's nothing more I want to do than slap all the liberals right in the face.
Well, yeah, I get people who say that, and I don't want to smack everyone in the face. Although there are many of them that I would like to give a very stern talking to, or maybe slightly more than that, you know.
Right. And
I don't want to hurt everybody, but there are just many of them that they spew such nonsense. For instance, you know, especially during the BLM riots with the Antifa peoples. They were walking around, and anyone who supported Trump or even Trump himself, they were like, he's a fascist. And there are videos on YouTube or in other places where people were like, okay, can you define what a fascist is? And they just sit there and they're like, no, I can't. And you're like, it's exactly right. You hopped on a bandwagon. You don't know what the heck you're talking about. Trump isn't a fascist. We're not fascist. But you just heard what someone said and you heard what they were doing. You're like, oh, well, you know, they believe this one other thing that I might agree with, so they must be the exact same as me, and I'm just going to spew whatever it is they're talking about. I do think that much of the group that is liberals needs a good wake-up call. But you have some people who are like, maybe this country would be better off without liberals, and I say that that's not true just because
that would be the same having no conservatives.
Yeah, the same as having no conservatives. If you remove debate, then you remove a kind of a check and balance, right? If you were to have only one party led by one majority leader in our government, then it wouldn't be a democracy with a two-party system. It would just be a dictatorship with a parliament.
Yeah, and talking about the slap him in the face, because I get that feeling. But thankfully, I think a lot of conservatives will draw that line as, okay, it's the line of there's words and then there's actions. And just because someone says something doesn't mean you're able to take action against them physically. You're not.
All right.
Yeah.
You're like, man, I would love to just smack him in the face and wake him up. But then, you know, in real life, we think about our actions before we do things. And you're like, okay, actually walking up and smacking this person in the face is not the right thing to do, even though I may feel like doing it. And that's a difference, because you have people on the liberal, as we saw over the summer with riots, and they're just like, you know, feel like I want to do this, so I'm just going to do whatever I want. You know, or people who with matters of abortion, right? I feel like partaking in the act that leads to abortion, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it and deal with the consequences later, even if they are at the cost of an innocent child's life. And that's a big difference. The people on the right, going back to the respect that we brought at the beginning of the show, they think about their actions before they do it and the consequences that can come from them, despite whatever their beliefs are. And so that's another important difference, especially between the radicals. I would say even the radical right does a better job of watching their mouth, or keeping their actions in check than the people on the left do, because they just turn into the screamers.
Yeah, not that
one
we
more
radical right people, but
no, no.
We'll take this, answer it real quick, and then we do need to go.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, that's known as Russia and or China.
Exactly. Those are the places where people get silenced and where the government especially takes action because someone says something. And we don't believe that in America. We believe you have the right to free speech. You have the right to be stupid in what you say. And we're not allowed to take action against you because you said something that we think is stupid.
Yeah, that wraps it up pretty well. It goes back to the very beginning. Conservatives have a value of respect for the Constitution, and that's what many of them strongly believe in. We respect First and Second Amendment, every other amendment in the Constitution itself, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, the ability to have free speech and to say what you want, or believe in what you want, listen to what news you want, and the news can say what it wants. But when things start to infringe on the rights of our people, that's where we start to draw the line. And that's the key difference between the left. They have a lack of respect. They I would say they probably believe in change at whatever cost, even if it's change that not only isn't necessary, but is pointless, or even wrong in some instances. And so they just believe in finding excuses for their actions, following that bandwagon versus believing in individual rights, and they judge they judge the group by the actions of a few versus the conservatives who judge a person by their own actions.
Yep, I think that's a really great place to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys, everyone, for showing up today. We're glad everybody came in, and glad for the comments. My name is Colson.
My name is Spencer. We're 18 and American.
We're signing off. Everyone have a good day. We'll see you guys later.
Yep, thanks for all the respectful comments.
Yep, bye guys.